Dr. Allinson, we had the press release about proactively taking steps to exclude all Russian, Belarusian businesses from air and ship registries.
Yep.
What's thinking behind that? Because it has the appearance of the government has gone from not all Russians are bad to we're now going to tar everybody of the same brush who may have ever met a Russian. It's sort of got this different vibe to it all of a sudden.
It has, and what we've seen internationally is a change. We started off with sanctions against individuals, particularly those directly related to the Putin regime. Then it started broadening out to people in business in Russia. And then you've got some of the big companies pulling out completely in terms of their stores, their services from Russia, to put as much political and economic pressure on the Russian government as possible. So we're part of that international effort. Again, in terms of our involvement in Russia, it's fairly minimal, but we do know that we're registering Russian-owned vessels in terms of aircraft, yachts and commercial ships. And so we started off following the UK sanctions. It became quite clear that we needed to go further with that. So we started following the EU sanctions as well. And now we're broadening that out to any exposure to Russian businesses. Again, to try to put as much pressure on the Russian economy as possible to get them to withdraw and cease the war in Ukraine.
But just, you say all Russian businesses, how exact are we going? Is it anybody who has a minute shareholding in a business which may be related to Russia? Or?
I mean, that's a very good question, and that's why we have to do it quite carefully, because some of these ships and aircraft may have multiple owners, one of whom might be Russian, so there is a bit of work being done to try to actually quantify that. It's quite obvious when you get a high net worth individual who lives in Russia, who has a ship or aircraft registered with us, who's then on the sanctions list. They are taken off straight away. And again, deregistering a ship or a plane means you cannot use it. It's basically either grounded, or as soon as it goes into a port, it's then impounded. So it is quite a severe sanction. But what we're now doing is exiting any business in terms of any Russian owned vessels and anything that's linked with any of the Russian banks or Russian companies.
So we've seen, for example, sailing yacht A, which appeared in Douglas. That's one of the ones that's been seized now by Italian authorities, and that was. And there's been ones which have been sort of seized in Spain and this. And so I suppose the thing, is this coming from elsewhere? Are we getting pressure from elsewhere to do this? Or is it the island has decided we're going to get ahead of the game a little bit and do this?
It's the latter. We're not getting pressure. There have been some comments, I think, in Westminster about our registration. We've followed UK sanctions right the way through, but we've also gone above and beyond that in terms of EU sanctions. We're not getting pressure from anyone else. This is actually being proactive. And the pressure we're getting really is from the Manx people who want to show solidarity with the people of Ukraine. So we're trying to show that in as the most forceful but legal way as we can.
It's just on this, I mean, the press release was slightly interesting weird because it was proactively taking steps. It didn't say we're doing it. It sort of said that we're preparing to do it. Is it, I suppose the thing is, why not just do it? Okay. If we're going to say this, it's not just, there's the argument about Abramovich was given time to get money out of London.
Yeah.
Is this not just the same thing, that we're giving a bit of time to prepare?
No, we are doing it. As we just said, sometimes there is a little bit of detective work that needs to be done to make sure that you're targeting the right individuals. We've already taken 19 aircraft off the registry straight away. We've already done 2 large yachts, and we've also issued notice to a further 39 vessels with Russian connections. Some of them, like the sanctions ones, are done straight away, which means that they can be impounded or they can't take off from an airport. Some of the other vessels that we're delisting, we do give them a slight bit of notice that they can get into a port, or that they can tell the crew that they're no longer needed. There's a range of different ways of doing this, but we are deregistering them, we are taking them off the lists, and in essence, some people said, well, they'll just re-register with somebody else then. What's the point? It's really, really hard for a Russian-owned vessel to re-register with any of the other registries in the world now.
Well, I mean, you had the case with Abramovich, his private jets were deregistered and then he was seen flying in one of them. So it's sort of like, you can see the thing of why people are saying, well, why does it matter if we're doing this?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of those who are under sanctions will not be able to re-register anywhere else. Basically the planes are grounded at airports, won't let them in. There are some jurisdictions, particularly in Russia and some of its allies, who will allow you to fly around there. So if you can get your planes there very, very quickly, sometimes that people will get round some of the sanctions. But we're doing as much as possible to actually enforce the sanctions and be part of the international community.
So I know you've got numbers there, and it's one of the asked, but how many Russian and Belarusian assets are there on the registries?
Okay. In terms of the shipping registry, they've got no Belarusian assets there at all. As I said, we've done 2 yachts off straight away. We've identified another 39 vessels with Russian connections that will be coming off. That's, to put it in perspective, we've got a total of 864 ships on the shipping registry. So that's not a small amount, but doesn't dent the overall figures. And we will continue to work internationally with various intelligence organisations, financial organisations, and crime organisations to identify any other vessels that need to come off. In terms of the aircraft, we've got 19 aircraft been taken off. That's out of a total of 320.
So just, I suppose, in terms of that, international reputation sort of side of things, what does this do for Shrewsbury? Because obviously there's the element of acting in the international cooperation side of things, but equally, is this not, let's be blunt, there are regimes out there who we have historically had on registries.
Yep.
Is there not an element of this could lead to people in other countries who may or may not have great relations with Britain, the EU, and various other things, taking their planes and boats off these registries?
Yes. In answer to your question, that is, going into the future, we are coming down really quite hard on Russian-owned vessels. You're quite right, there may be other people who say, well, I'd rather go for a slightly less ethical registry, and they may exit doing business with us. That, to be honest with you, that's a price I think government are quite happy to pay. Our registry is amongst the best in the world. It's won international awards. We pride ourselves on the ethical policies, but also the quality and the integrity of the registries, and that's far more valuable than just taking other people's money.
Just in terms of this, when you actually make the decision that, right, we're going to go down this route, how does that work in terms of the people who actually are owning these things? Do you just have to ring them up and go, yeah, bad news?
They're contacted personally, often. Again, when a sanction comes in, whether it's from the UK, normally from the UK, it's brought into Manx law fairly quickly, almost automatically, and then there is a mechanism whereby people are informed by the UK government and know that they're going to have sometimes fairly draconian restrictions put on them. With some of the other businesses that we're exiting, we will write to them or email or telephone them and explain the situation and say that they're being delisted. So we try to do it in a proportionate and legal way as much as possible, because again, we're dealing with the legality of putting somebody on the registry but also taking somebody off, and you have to have good grounds for that. We have good grounds because we've actually made that policy in terms of Russian-owned vessels and anything to do with Belarus as well. In
terms of with things that are registered here, though, the lists are there. They may not necessarily have the owner down, but you can Google these things. Is this advancing towards about business registries as well, and also property registries again? Because obviously property on the island's become a bit more opaque in the past few years with GDPR, but now in the UK they're saying we're going to name what property is owned in London, which is far worse than the Alman has ever been for laundering Russian and other assets. Is that a step you think the island could end up taking, is more publicly saying this is how much not influence, but this is how much money is in here from these countries?
In answer to your question, yes. And you also make the interesting point that when you look at other registries around the world, particularly the UK registry, they probably have a much bigger exposure to Russian vessels there than we do. The Isle of Man government have signed up to the whole idea of having a beneficial ownership register. We already do share that information with various law enforcement or taxation officers, but going further, as this develops, we will be part of that. I think you're quite right. In the UK, there are serious concerns about the amount of property that's tied up in shell companies. It might be owned by all sorts of people, not just Russians, but other people from repressive regimes. Certainly, we are working with the Financial Services Authority to look at the registries over here, to look at the exposure, and they've written to a lot of the finance companies companies over here as well to get them to do due diligence and double check the clients that they're working with.
Just finally, in terms of the island's international reputation when it comes to these sorts of things, we have been in the past threatened with blacklisting and grey listing and pretty much everything else that mostly the EU could throw at us. Does this help the island significantly against that now? This is sort of saying that we are doing this, we're following what you're doing, we're getting ahead of what some stuff's been done elsewhere. I suppose that, how important is this moving forward beyond the situation in Ukraine and Russia?
I mean, the reason for doing this isn't to make ourselves look good. The reason to do this is because it's the right thing to do. However, when you look at the way we do business internationally, I think we have to show that we use the highest standards, both ethically, morally, and also legally. And so this is part of that. This is part of showing that we are an international player, that we will play by the rules, but also we will set our own rules if we need to.
Dr. Allinson, thank you.
You're very welcome.